Okay. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Okay. Aujourd'hui, we're going to talk about the subjunctive, and we're going to relate it a little bit to our cher ami, le petit prince. So, without much further ado, Mademoiselle Heller and I will get started.
Super.
So let's start with a little revision of the subjunctive and what we already know from before coronavirus. So first of all, can anyone tell me what we already know about the subjunctive? Think about that.
Moi, je peux.
Oh, 12? Mademoiselle?
Oui. So what I remember from the subjunctive is that when you have a sentence, you want to look and see if there is a trigger phrase.
Mm-hmm.
And one way to make sure or like confirm that it's a trigger phrase is that there's the word que with it. And then after the que, we should be talking about like a new person or a new subject.
Okay. So you're correct. There's 3 parts to any sentence with the subjunctive. The trigger phrase, que, and then 2 different subjects, a new subject after the que. So my question is, any sentence with que has the subjunctive, yeah?
No, actually. It's kind of like in math when you learn that a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle's not a square. So, yeah. So, like every sentence that has a subjunctive has que, but like not every que means subjunctive because we know that que, for example, can also mean what, like que fait-il, what is he doing? So, like that's not subjunctive.
Okay. So what kinds of times when I see que would the trigger phrase mean I need the subjunctive? What are some types of trigger phrases?
Yeah. So some of the trigger phrases that we first learned about were ones like il faut que and il est important que. And those ones were called impersonal expressions because like most of them when you translate it into English just mean like it is some kind of adjective, like it is important that or it is necessary that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they usually, for clarification, everyone, they usually indicate necessity or possibility. So important would be necessity. If something's important, there's necessity there. So a few examples of those would be il faut que, il est nécessaire que, il est possible que. Okay. What other kinds of expressions or verbs are trigger phrases for the subjunctive?
I remember that we talked about such verbs like vouloir que or préférer que. And I remember that we said this was because maybe I want you to study or I want you to teach me something, but it's not a guarantee that that will happen. So even though I want it or I desire it, we don't know that that action will occur. So we use the subjunctive.
Right. And those are called expressions of volition or desire or will. Okay. And so some examples, like we said, are vouloir que, exiger que, and préférer que. So recently, we've been studying The Little Prince, who is here to help us learn the subjunctive. And we've also been putting the subjunctive in a lot of the questions we ask you. So we're hoping that you can tie in what we've been asking you with another type of trigger phrase. Okay. So have you noticed that recently in your work with The Little Prince and the subjunctive, we've been using another type of trigger phrase? Which of these options is another category of trigger phrases? Expressions of hypothesis, expressions of confusion, expressions of emotion, or expressions of finality? Take a minute to think back on what we've been doing with the Little Prince before we reveal the answer. All right, Mademoiselle Heller, what's our answer?
All right, well, I'm going to say that the correct answer is C, expressions of emotion. And the way that I know this, based on the exercises we've done, we have had activities such as the choice menu writing, where we had sentences like, Le Petit Prince regrette que la rose ne soit pas gentille. So saying that he's sorry that the rose wasn't nice. Or also making statements like that the prince is angry that the pilot doesn't listen. And so I know that it's expressions of emotions because of those examples. And as a French teacher, I know that options A, B, and D are just false options.
Parce que tu es très intelligente.
Parce que j'ai beaucoup étudié le français. J'ai on leg up, you know, so.
Yeah, on leg up, wait. Okay, so, bon travail. If you guessed, like Mademoiselle Heller just explained, expressions of emotion, then you've been paying attention to what we've been doing. The subjunctive is used after expressions of emotion when there is a change in subject, which is similar, like Mademoiselle Heller referenced, to the choice menu you did a couple weeks ago. So here's the menus from the choice menu that we did a couple weeks ago. And we're going to go over a few of these because some of you said you had some trouble with this. So we want to make sure that everyone understands. So a few examples that we gave are Le pilote est surpris que le petit prince soit dans le désert. Okay? The pilot is surprised that the little prince is in the desert. La rose est triste que le petit prince aille à d'autres planètes. The rose is sad that the little prince goes to other planets. Le petit prince est heureux que le mouton ait une muselière. The little prince is happy that the sheep has a muzzle. Then the sheep can't eat the rose. Le petit prince est fâché que le pilote ne comprenne pas. The little prince is angry that the pilot doesn't understand. And one more example. Le petit prince regrette que la rose ne soit pas gentille. The little prince regrets that the rose is not nice. So one thing you should take note of is the reason why expressions of emotion require the use of the subjunctive. And that is because they express subjectivity, or what that means is like just because the pilot is surprised, that doesn't mean that I would be surprised. Okay, so emotions change based on the speaker. So they express subjectivity on the part of the speaker. So what surprises the speaker might not surprise someone else. What makes the rose sad might not make me sad. Maybe I'm happy that the little prince is going to other planets and exploring the world. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense.
And can I add one thing? That in these 5 examples, we've highlighted in blue the verbs that are put in the subjunctive. And these verbs actually look very different than when they're not in the subjunctive. So it's very clear. Like soit looks very different than a, and they both come from the verb être. And I looks very different than va, which both come from aller. But if you look at the chart up at the top where it says action, all of those verbs are actually written in the subjunctive. So arrive looks exactly the same as it would if it weren't in the subjunctive. So a lot of times you might read the subjunctive, or you might even have used it in the past without knowing that you were doing it correctly. So you can't always tell based on spelling when the subjunctive is used, which is why you need to be able to pay attention to the trigger phrases to help you out.
Yep. So one thing that is important that we've talked about in the past, but we're going to reiterate with the expressions of emotion, is that if there is no change in subject, then we want to use the infinitive of the verb. Okay, so n'oubliez pas, don't forget, we only use the subjunctive when there is a change in subject. If the subject were to stay the same, we would use de plus the infinitive. And I took a few of the examples from the previous slide and used them with the same subject. So, le pilote est surpris d'être dans le désert. So this example, the pilot is surprised to be in the desert. The pilot is surprised that the pilot is in the desert. There's no change in subject, which means that we're going to use de plus the infinitive. Le petit prince est heureux d'avoir une muselière pour le mouton. The little prince is happy to have a muzzle for the sheep. Again, he's happy that he has a muzzle. Le petit prince est fâché de ne pas être compris par le pilote. The little prince is angry to not be understood by the pilot. And here, one thing we wanted to point out, and you'll see this again in the later slide, is that when you make an infinitive negative, you put the ne and the rest of the negative expression before the infinitive. And lastly, le petit prince regrette de se disputer avec la rose. The little prince regrets arguing with the rose. Ms. Heller, anything to add?
I think that you covered everything that I would want to say about this. But yeah, just think about whether you need que or not by whether or not you are changing the subject. If the person is having a reaction about something that they are still doing, then you're not going to change the subject and you're going to need the infinitive.
Right. So one other thing we wanted to mention, a little more about the subjunctive, is that the subjunctive is also used with expressions that express doubt or uncertainty. So, and this is because it's not sure whether or not the thing will happen, okay, or whether or not the new subject will complete the action. So verbs such as douter, il n'est pas certain que, ne pas être sûr que, ne pas croire, and ne pas penser require the use of the subjunctive if there is a change in subject.
Pardon me. I think that this ties into, or you can see the relation between subjects of doubt and the trigger phrases of want and desire or volition, because even though I don't think something will happen, maybe it will happen, or even though I don't want something to happen, maybe it will happen. So it's like that same sort of relation of, even though I have a certain feeling or preference, we don't know that anybody else would react like the same way.
Right. So Miss Heller could doubt something and I could not doubt that same thing. And so that shows a lot of subjectivity on the part of the speaker. So we have a few examples of this as well. Oh, well, I said that already. For example, je doute que le pilote survive. I doubt that the pilot will survive. One thing I want to mention when we talk about this example here is that it's important to remember, which we've talked about in the past, that the present subjunctive often translates to the future in English. So I doubt that the pilot will survive. Il n'est pas certain que la rose soit unique. It is not certain that the rose is unique. Le pilote n'est pas. Oops.
Uh-oh.
I'm going to fix that real quick. Maybe.
Dun, 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 dun.
All right. That and pilote should have an E on it.
Oh, my goodness.
So many typos, Mademoiselle Heller.
You're preaching to the choir here.
Right. My students are not surprised by this.
Yeah, right?
Okay, so le pilote n'est pas sûr qu'il y ait de l'eau dans le désert. The pilot is not sure that there is water in the desert. Le renard ne croit pas que le petit prince l'apprivoise. The fox does not believe that the little prince will tame him. And some of these come from this week's reading, so that will be important to you later.
Yeah, I was gonna say that verb apprivoise is a key word for understanding this chapter.
It sure is. Apprivoiser means to tame.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, le petit prince ne pense pas que les habitants des planètes fassent des choses importantes. The little prince does not think that the inhabitants of the planets are doing important things. Okay, so we know that, you know, the businessman and the ivrogne, the drunkard, and the
Graph and Leroy and
le vaniteur, all kind of do things that seem totally pointless to the little prince. So it's important to keep that in mind. Okay, I think that's it, Miss Heller.
Yeah, I think so too. So just add these new 5 trigger phrases to your ever expanding list of trigger phrases. And, you know, if you can't remember all of them, try to remember to ask yourself the question, would somebody else think differently about this? And that way that can help you decide whether something might be a trigger phrase or not.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Au revoir, nos amis.
Au revoir. Au revoir.